Hi guys! I am doing this video to post on YouTube about calligraphy since I may not be able to get everybody that wanted to do the Zoom meeting. So first off, I like to explain what calligraphy is not. So calligraphy is not cursive. So you just need to be able to get that out of your head really quickly up front, because the way you do calligraphy, even though it looks similar to cursive, it is not cursive, and trying to eliminate the tendency to write in cursive will really increase your ability to do calligraphy. Calligraphy is not letters, believe it or not. Calligraphy is actually strokes instead of letters, and then you combine strokes to make letters and then combine letters to make words. So why I use strokes in calligraphy is because it helps increase your consistency and your ability to make things really even, and the ability to make letters look exactly the same over and over and over, because perfecting a few strokes is much easier than perfecting every letter of the alphabet. So what calligraphy is strokes, and there are 7 or 8, depending on who you talk to. Generally there's 7 solid ones, and there's an entry stroke that I like to practice too, just because it helps me, so I will talk about that one also. Calligraphy is variations in pressure, so you will always have a thick downstroke and a thin upstroke, and I can show you that. Like, every stroke that you make is going to be really fat when it's going down, and then really skinny going up, and that gives you a really big variation in the size of your letters, and it adds to the beauty of it, in my opinion. I really like that. Calligraphy is consistency, so it's being able to write the same thing over and over and over and making it look like it was printed that way instead of drawn. So you can tell I'm definitely no professional. You can see that there's inconsistencies in mine. You can see that I did not just copy paste all of these. But I mean, like, in generally, since I've practiced this a long time, you can see that they are in somewhat consistent. Calligraphy is also really slow. I find that when I start getting impatient or I'm trying to rush, things always get messed up. So calligraphy is very slow, and it also needs to be slow not only to help with your consistency, but also to help with your pens. So like this little pen, this is a brush tip, and if you look at the way that it works, let me camera adjust, when you press down on it, that little tip flexes, and it's really hard to see, but most markers, the tip is not made to be flexible. Oh, sorry, I can't get the camera to adjust. Anyway, but the tip is not made to be flexible, but these ones are specially made so that the tip can move. So like when you press it, it will bend, and which is really great to write with. It helps you be able to get that really thick downstroke and a thin upstroke. But the problem is that on brush pens, it takes some time for it to flex back. And so the faster you write, the less you'll be able to have these fine tips, because your pen won't flex back to that really pointed state quite as quickly. Alright, so I like to explain first the writing utensils that I like to use. This one is a Tombow Fuden Asoki. I think that's how you say it. Anyway, it's in Japanese writing pen. It's a brand of Tombow, and I generally like Tombow a lot. There are a lot of other brands that I do like, but this is generally my go-to because I can buy pretty cheap in bulk. Pens can be pretty expensive. These brush pens, you can get them between like $4 and $8 a pen, but I don't know, it just depends on where you go. But I like to buy them in bulk, so I can get them for like $2.50, which is pretty nice. So that's one reason why I like them, and I also really like the quality. I really like dip pens. So this is a dip pen, There it has the metal nib and then your holder, and this is an oblique style one where it has this little flange here that holds your nib so that it holds your nib at an angle. It just helps you get a better angle when you're writing in calligraphy. Anyway, I love these. If it weren't kind of inconvenient to use them, this would be the only thing that I would use. I love how I get the better variations. Like when you press down on these, my camera's not zooming very well. Anyway, but you can see how those tips pull apart, and then that makes the ink spread out as you're writing. And I feel like I get a better transition from thick to thin with these than I do with a brush pen. And I can show you some of that later with a brush pen, some of the things that I don't necessarily like. But anyway, with these, it's definitely my favorite. I love the inks that you can use. It's not super convenient because you have to clean them after each use to make sure that the ink doesn't dry on there. Otherwise, it just makes it harder to use it the next time you use it. And you can't really pause in writing, like set your pen down for a second to do something and then come back and do it without cleaning it, because then the ink dries on there and it just makes it hard for the ink to flow off the next time you dip it in there. I do see a lot of calligraphy videos with Crayola markers, and definitely that's an okay thing to use. When you use them, you have to break the tip. So like you have to press it down onto the paper until it starts getting flexible. The problem with that is that Crayola markers aren't made to do that. And so you are breaking the tip. And so while it will be flexible for a little while, it will shortly thereafter start to just become flat, and it won't keep a flexible tip and go back to a pointed thing. So it really shortens the life of your Crayola marker. So like I said, you can do that if you want to. I don't find it to be very cost effective because it just ruins your marker so quickly, but definitely an option if you want to do that because the colors are pretty fun. So most other calligraphy pens are just a variation of a brush tip pen. You can get them pretty big or small, and this is a small size. I usually write in a smaller size like this than I do with the bigger size. I just find that I use it more, not necessarily that I like it more. Like addressing letters and writing people's names on stuff, I usually use a smaller script than a bigger script. Paper, like when you're looking for kinds of paper that you want to use for calligraphy, you definitely can use any kind of paper, but some papers are less, have not as good results as others. Like this is just regular printer paper, and I use it because it's definitely cheap and it's easy to practice with. But the reason that I don't usually like printer paper is because my markers can bleed on them really easy, and so you don't keep really crisp, clean lines. I prefer a cardstock or a thick cardstock, but you have to make sure it's really smooth. If you have a rough grain on your paper, it will fray the nib of your marker, and it just tears it to pieces and it'll ruin it really quickly. So whatever paper you use, you want it to be smooth. And so watercolor paper generally isn't super smooth, or sketching paper, like for pencils and stuff, that's not always very smooth. And so I don't like using watercolor paper to do calligraphy with brush pens on because of its roughness, and also because it's made to absorb a lot of water, thus watercolors, and so it'll suck the ink right out of your pens really quickly, and so it'll just shorten the life of them. Okay, so getting into like what calligraphy actually is now, I have already said that it is thick downstrokes and thin upstrokes, and you will also always see that in calligraphy. Some people will have a really nice calligraphy that's called faux calligraphy that doesn't have thick or thin, and it's still really pretty, but generally that's what calligraphy is thick down, thin up. There's basic guidelines, like these lines that I have on the paper. These are the guidelines for calligraphy, and I don't write with all of these anymore. I generally just like use a laser to mark out my baseline, and that's all I use anymore. But I used these all the time when I was first learning. They were very helpful. So first you have this bottom line right here. this is called your baseline. This is where all your letters will sit, like just writing on a normal line like you do with anything else. This line right here is called your waistline. And so this space between the base and the waist is going to be all your small size letters, like A, M, N, little ones like that don't have a upper or lower. So this is how you set the size of your letters. This very bottom one is called your descending line. This is going to be where all of your low hanging parts, or the descending parts of your letters, are going to go. And there's a line there just to keep it consistent, because calligraphy is all about consistency. So this is how, like, your G, your P, your Y, anything that goes down, you want them all to be consistent down to the same line, wherever you set that line to be. It doesn't have, there's no specific like millimeter length or anything. I think it's all personal preference. Anyway, this is your ascending line. You know, things like F and T and anything that goes above is going to all come to this height. All right, so when you very first start putting your pen to the paper, you're going to just first experiment with how it feels to press down on your nib. So like just first press down as hard as you can and then draw a really thick line down and a really as thin as you can line up, because most people are not used to writing with different pressures like you do in calligraphy, because you are changing pressure all the time. And it's like you don't do that with a normal pen. And so it's a little bit tricky to get used to, but you know, you catch on pretty quick. So you just experiment, and you also experiment in the direction that you hold your pen. Some angles that you hold your pen, you won't get as thick of line. So like if you're holding your pen up, or if you're holding it straight down, no matter how hard you press, you're not going to get thick. But if you kind of hold it sideways so that you can get the whole breadth of that tip laid down, when you press down, you can get a really thick line. And then remember to give a little bit of time for it to flex back to pointed, so that you can get a really thin upstroke. So you just practice that a little bit, trying to get used to being up and down like that. I'm not a lefty, but I do see a lot of lefty tips when you're lettering, so it's kind of awkward for me. But some people, when they are lettering, they'll do what's a hook like this, so that you're kind of writing above your letters. And like I said, I'm definitely no lefty expert. I just have seen some of these, so I don't know if it'll help you or not if you're a lefty. But you know, just to write above your letter, I do think that this might be a little bit hard to get a really thick downstroke, just because your pen is not more sideways. And some people will write below, but I have seen quite a bit of calligraphers actually write backwards. So like they will start at this side and then write this way. Now, if you do that, that does make it so that you have to really know all your strokes in order in reverse, so that you can not mess up the spelling of your words. And that, when I stamp letters, I usually stamp in reverse, and definitely can be tricky. I've misspelled a lot of things and had to start over because I didn't have it down right. But so that is definitely an option too, especially with like when you're using a pointed pen and it's going to leave wet ink all along your paper. I see people do that. Or you can also even flip your paper upside down and do it upside down. I've seen lefties do that too. So you pretty much, I think you just pick a method that feels comfortable for you, just like any other thing in life, and then just perfect what feels comfortable to you. So I'm sure that being a lefty sometimes is extremely inconvenient, so I apologize for you lefties. Okay, so the strokes are, these are the first 5 here, and then I've got 2 more on this page, and I have given out all of these papers to everyone who's doing the Zoom class, so if anybody else wants this, please message me. The first one is called an underturn, and it's basically just a little U. So you're going to start at your waistline and then press down hard and then let up your pressure and light up. So just a basic U. Oh, I forgot to say, like, these slanted guidelines are going to be how you want to slant your letters. So calligraphy almost always has a slant. It doesn't have to when you are modernizing it and stylizing your own. You can do it straight up or down or more, and I'll get into that later. But generally, traditional calligraphy has a 55-degree angle of slant, and I guess that's just the universal beauty slant number. So if you took an actual professional calligraphy class, that's what they would tell you. I don't know if these lines are that or not because I'm not professional. I just found some that I like and they work for me. And I don't generally write with a precise angle anyway. I like to stylize mine a lot, which is great. So when you're doing that, each vertical of your stroke should follow the same slant. So like if you're doing your underturn, you shouldn't have like one going this way and one going this way. Okay, so like your vertical on this one is going up and your vertical on this one is going way out. So you don't want that. You want them to be as parallel as possible. And that's not always very easy, especially when you're using a bigger tip. You can see that the little gray letters that I've written here, or strokes that I've written, they're a lot thicker than using this. And so sometimes the thicker the pen, the harder it is to get a good stroke. The other thing with these and changing pressure is you don't want to have a thick stroke all the way to the bottom. Okay, well that one turned out kind of good actually. A lot of times you'll have a really fat part and then it transitions too quick into a really skinny part, and it just doesn't always work out very well where it's makes a good transition. Like a lot of times I'll find that I have a jog mark, like you see in this way is a little bit better example when you can see this transition, how there's like a little triangle right there of space where I pushed down too fast and so I didn't get a good transition with my marker. You can get that on your underturns too, where that I usually will just have to go back in and fill that in so that it's smooth. But you know, I find that is a problem if I'm not letting up on my pressure soon enough. So when you are doing your underturn stroke, you're going to start out at full pressure at the very top, and you're going to let off your pressure about 2/3 to 3/4 the way down, so that when you are at full pressure here, you will be at light pressure by the time you touch the bottom. So it's not full pressure from top to bottom. It's full pressure from top to 2/3 to 3/4 down, and then let up the pressure until it's zero pressure at the bottom. So by the time you hit the bottom, you want to have no pressure. And you can see how, like on these bigger ones, how the thickness of these starts to diminish as it hits the bottom. Some of that depends on how you hold your pen. Some of that depends on the paper. But I find a lot of it is dependent on the pressure that I use. And I find I have a lot better transition from thick to thin, and I like the appearance of my lettering a lot better when I let up the pressure at that 2/3 to 3/4 mark. Okay, so the next one is an overturn, and it's just like upside down U. So you're going to start really, really thin, go up, and then once you're rounded that corner, or rounded that edge onto the far side, then start doing a full thickness. Don't put full pressure on at the very top. You're going to, again, start the transition at the top from zero pressure, and then make sure you're at full pressure about 1/4 to 1/3 the way down. So just like this one, just the opposite. So you don't want to put full pressure on at the very top. You want to make a transition, and then you'll be at full pressure once you hit part of the way down. Okay, and again, you make sure that all your lines are, your slants are as consistent as you can get them. So I like to think of it as, on any of these strokes, that there's lines that are parallel and then just connected with a circle. So if I think of these lines being perfectly parallel, some visually in my head seems to help, so that when I'm doing my overturns or underturns or anything, it makes it a lot smoother. All right, so then the next two are just a compound, where you can connect an overhand and an underhand in each order. So the first one is going to be an underturn first into an overturn. So you're going to start down thick, up thin, down thick. And these ones, this middle line is the hardest one to get parallel to all the rest. So a lot of times you can see in this one how this line is a little bit less or a little bit more slanted than these, so it's more like an N than it is like 3 lines that are parallel connected with 2 round edges there. So, and same with this one, this middle line is the hardest one. And especially since in this one, your area of full pressure is not going to be very big. So remember, you're not going to hit full pressure until you're partway down, and you're going to start lifting up full pressure when you're not all the way to the bottom. So your area of full pressure is really not very big. So you're going to start thin, thick, thin. Thin, round, thick, and then up. Okay, and then I have literally done thousands of pages of just strokes on repeat as long as I could tolerate doing it. And that's really how you practice calligraphy, is just over and over and over, over and over and over, times like 10 years, maybe. I don't know. I haven't got that far yet. I'm probably about 5 years in and I still haven't felt like I perfected anything, but I can see progress, which is good. That's all what it's all about. Right, then your ascending loop, you're going to start about your waistline and then do a curve up and then full thickness all the way down. Now, like the guidelines say like this line should be pretty straight. I don't usually write like that. I find that I like the appearance of this line to be slightly curved more than I like it straight up and down. So I like it to be a little bit curved instead of straight, and that's just my preference. So that's, again, I think that if you know the rules and you practice it how it should be, like just the basics, the basics without any personalization or flair or stylization, and you get that mastered, then it is so much easier to do stylization when you want to. So if practicing a curve probably isn't the best idea at the beginning, but if you want to keep that in mind as you practice and you get more comfortable with things, then that's definitely something you can add to your practicing as you go. All right, so now you've got your descending stroke where it's just full thickness all the way down, let up and around, and then cross at the baseline. All the way down, let up, around, and cross at the baseline. Okay. Now, the oval, I think, is the very hardest one. Like, these little guys give me the most problems. So you're going to start not at the top, kind of at this 2 o'clock position there, so that when your edges meet, it's a lot easier to make them meet than trying to make them meet during a transition of thick and thin. It's a lot easier to do it this way, I promise. So you're going to go up and around, thick around, down, and meet up again. Okay, see? No. So you can see that I am very inconsistent with writing these little ovals. It's not easy to get them perfected. But it's a lot easier to see your imperfection when you have the same thing written over and over and over. Luckily, when you're writing letters, combining all your strokes into letters and words, you don't usually have the same stroke repeated after another. So it's not as easy to see the inconsistencies, which is fabulous. Anyway, so these are the basic strokes. And this top one right here is the entry stroke that I like to practice, even if it's not always counted as a stroke, but I use it at the beginning of almost every word. So it's just basically a little swoop. And I'll connect that into whatever word that I'm writing. Okay, so those are all the basic strokes. And like I said, you just practice these thousands of times and you'll start to get to the point where it comes really naturally, where it's not so hard. All right, so then you're going to start connecting your strokes into letters. And this part is where it gets fun. So an A is an oval stroke and an underhand turn, an underturn. So you do your oval, then your underturn. Now you're going to make those kiss. When you touch these, you're just barely want them to touch. You don't want them to overlap. This example right here is one that's overlapping, and this one is just barely too far apart. You can see that there's a little space in there, and then these two are where it's barely kissing. And so you can see that this one just looks a little crowded, and so it's like where you can just barely get your strokes to touch is the sweet spot. So no overlapping, no gap, you just want them to touch. Now there's this little space that's called negative space, and you can see it's this little triangle area of empty space right here, and the little triangle area of space right there. I find that I like the appearance of letters when that space is bigger. You can see on this letter it's a lot smaller, and I don't like the appearance of that. Now, everybody's different, but I think that generally most people like the appearance of the bigger negative space. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you see that you don't like the appearance of your letters when you're practicing, but you can't really put your finger on why you don't like it, take a look at that and see if part of it might be that your negative space isn't the size that it could be. Most people like it a little bit bigger, but everybody has their preference, so you just get to choose how you like it. Okay, and of course, because we speak English, everything has exceptions to the rules. So your letter B is not going to follow all your stroke rules. So there are some extra strokes that don't really fit, but you can perfect them as well. So you've got your ascending loop. Now this one, just because I like to write a letter B that looks like a letter B instead of like the traditional like cursive-ish B. Like a cursive-ish B would be something like that. And that would follow what you want, like a ascending loop transitioned into an underturn. But I don't like writing B's like that. If you do, then you can do it that way, definitely. But the way I like it is to look like a regular B. So this next part is just like an overturn, and then I swoop it around so that it can exit out into the next letter. So when I combine those, I just make sure that that little bottom loop gets really close to the bottom of my ascending loop. Another thing in calligraphy that helps so much when you're beginning is to lift your pen after every single stroke. You do not want to be in the habit of keeping things in one smooth line like cursive. And that's the fallback of cursive, is because you're trying to keep things in one straight line without lifting your pen, is that your strokes end up pointing to different areas and you're not getting good consistency in angles or perfectly replicatable letters. So like if you're writing a G into a B, it's going to look different than a G into an I or something else, like because when you're writing cursive, because the bottom of your G is going to be pointing to a different area. Now in cursive, you are going to point it to the exact same place no matter what. But did I say cursive? I meant calligraphy. Anyway, so in calligraphy, all of your strokes are going to point in the exact same place no matter what your next stroke is going to be. And you either are going to cover up the end of that stroke with your next stroke, or you just connect it and leave it be. And somehow it looks like it's all connected like cursive, and it looks beautiful no matter what. So like for example, a G into a Y, like I was just talking about, if you did a G, okay, every single time you write a G, you're going to have your end exit to the same place no matter what. And I generally exit my letters to this area right here. That's what I prefer. Now, if I were doing an ascending loop and I didn't want to lift my pen, then I would be going like to a whole different place, because that's, anyway, so that's not how you do it. Instead, when you are connecting your things, like I generally end my stroke there, now I'm going to lift my pen off the paper, start again where I normally start, and then just overlap that edge. See, now they look like they're connected, but they're not. Like, I have physically lifted my pen, whereas here it curves around and just kind of goes different places, and so you lose a lot of your consistency and the beauty of it looking exactly the same from letter to letter when you don't pick up your pen. So every time you're doing strokes, when you're combining your letters, don't think of it as letters, don't think of it as words, think of it as strokes, and lift your pen every single time. I promise it'll really, really help in the beginning till you get used to it. All right, so now C is just like an oval, and you just exit out the side instead of finishing your oval. And remember the transitions from thick to thin on your letters. You don't want to reach full pressure until you're part of the way down. You don't, and then you'll stop having full pressure when you're part almost to the bottom, but not at the bottom. Your letter D is going to be an oval with an ascending loop. And ascending loops really they don't often end straight off at the bottom. They almost always are going to curve out like an underhand turn right there. So that's something that you might want to practice when you're doing your ascending loop practicing, is to, instead of just ending straight at the bottom, to then do a transition out. And now when you combine these to the letter D, you're going to just barely make those touch. Your letter E is going to be just a modified oval again. So instead of starting just right here like you would on an oval, you're just going to start on the inside, then exit out. Your F, a lot of this depends on how you like to write it. This is how I like to write my F. Some people will do an ascending loop and combined with a descending loop. So I think that if you just look at examples of other people's calligraphy and find what you like, then you can practice that. But anyway, this is how I like to do it. This is what I found most appealing for myself. So I just go down into a backwards descending loop, and then just make a little tiny oval on the outside, and then transition out to whatever my next stroke is going to be. That's another type of stroke you can practice if you wanted to, is a reverse descending loop, so that, you know, because your letter Q and your letter F, if you wanted to do that, but I don't think I ever did. I think I just did the regular two. But F, that's how I like that. Your G is an oval and a descending loop. Now, I don't know if you can see this right there. Oh, come on, camera. You see how you can kind of glimpse it when it focuses for a second. It's not a very smooth transition from thick to thin. It kind of has that jog mark right there. That's because I pressed down too fast on my brush pen, and it didn't have time to transition. It just all of a sudden went thin to thick. Anyway, so I'll just go back over that and kind of color it in so that it looks smooth, but that's because I was writing too fast. And so you can, when you see that, you can tell yourself to slow down, let your brush tip adjust to what you're doing. Your letter H is going to be an ascending loop with a compound turn. Like that. Your eye is going to be pretty basic. I like to practice my eye with an entrance stroke. I don't know why, I just do, but it's just basically an under turn with a dot. Your J is just a descending loop. I like the traditional way to practice your descending loops is to end at the baseline, but I like to end like kind of somewhere between the baseline and waistline. So that's just me, because I find that that's where I normally am going to connect my next stroke, so I just exit that way. K is another exception because English is weird. Okay, so it's going to look like a little R. So you're going to do a thick stroke down like that, and then a little swoop out. And as you practice thick and thin, you'll get the hang of where thick and thin should be. And L is going to be ascending loop, and then just transition out at the bottom. And M is going to be just a thick straight down full pressure stroke, and then one overhand and then one compound. So your overhand turn or overturn, then one compound. So it'll be there. Now when I am doing my overturn or my overhand turn, I am not going to retrace this straight line very much at all. Like, I'm just going to touch it there and then pretty much aim out. You see, and I did that like full thickness. Okay, so it's like just so that this negative space right here on this M is quite big. Whereas if I was going to retrace it a lot, it just doesn't look as good in my opinion. So I like to leave a lot of negative space there. And then same with this next stroke. Like, I'll start where I ended, but it does not overlap very much at all. Just at the very bottom pretty much. Your N is going to be just straight down, compound turn, your O, it's oval, but with your O's, you're always going to have just this little exit stroke that's at the top and kind of swooshes out. Now, this is like the traditional way to write an O. So your swoosh out is going to be where you connected the beginning and end of your stroke, so that if there's any overlap that doesn't match up, then you can kind of cover it with that, which is nice. I also like to write an O like this, where I start clear on the other side. And I go out like that. And I find that's a little easier for me to be consistent. But again, personal preference of how you like to write things. Now your P is going to be like this similar stroke to the B. So full pressure down. Something like that. But personal preference also. I think that like in traditional script, instead of even rounding at all, it looks really weird. I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but I don't like to write it that way, so I'd practice this way. Your Q, you're going to have your oval, and then your backwards descending loop. And R, so you're going to have like your little entrance stroke, the little swoop that I like to practice. Then there's going to be another like full pressure down swoop at the top. And this is going to be just above your waistline, and then it's going to come down and touch your waistline, and then you're going to do an underhand turn from that. So your swoop up. I like to overlap that swoop up and my little swoop down quite a bit. And then your underturn. S is the worst letter. I don't know why I struggle with it the most. Maybe because it's the least like any of the strokes. I don't know. I find that I like this style better just because I can actually make it look consistent. So it's just like a lot like a descending loop actually, but I just kind of swerve it around. You can do one like that as well. But I think those are a little trickier, especially when you start getting a bigger pen. Then it just overlaps a lot and it just kind of looks like a blob instead of an S. So I think it depends a lot on, one, your style and what you prefer, and two, on what you're using to write with. Your T is just going to be an extra tall underturn. And T's are another exception to the rule. They don't always go to the ascending line. You can for sure, but I don't know why they're a letter that generally don't touch the very top ascending line. Who knows? People who decided on rules in English are weird. And then, of course, just cross your T. W is 2 underturns and then a little swoop out. Wait, this is U. Sorry. 2 underturns. So underturn 1, underturn 2, and then when you combine them, like that. Okay. Your V is also, of course, another exception to the rule. So this one is going to be just slightly off angle, straight full pressure down. So it's not perfectly straight up, but it's not as much angle as you would write a normal V either, because remember, we're just trying to slant everything over. And then you're going to do a straight up line, and this one is going to be on your normal slant that you're writing everything else. And then a little swoop out. Now here's the W. This one is going to have 2 underturns and then your swoop out. Like that. X is weird. So this one is like a compound turn, but this one is supposed to have that middle line be completely off kilter because it's an X. So you are doing a compound turn, but it is supposed to be slanted totally off than what you would normally do. So you're going to do thin up, thick down in the middle, and then thin up again. So that's like one cross of your X, and then the other cross you're going to do it on the angle of whatever you're writing. Just kind of cross like that. So I don't know that I've ever written an X in actual calligraphy though, so let me know if you do. Your Y is pretty straightforward, underturn with a descending loop. And on my strokes here, you can see this one that I've overlapped my strokes a little more. And so this little negative space in this corner is smaller than this one, has quite a bit. And I prefer this look to this one. I like the more negative space. So again, if you're looking at your writing and you can't quite put your finger on why you don't like it, if you don't like it, that could be one thing to look at, is to look at your negative space and see if that is something. Because like this stroke pretty much doesn't touch my descending loop clear until the very top. There's a lot of space in there. So that's something you could look at. Your Z is going to be an overturn, and then your descending loop is also going to have another weird little overturn and then transition out. Odd letters. Okay, so now, like I said, you will probably not like your experience today because your first time with calligraphy, all you are going to see is wow, that is terrible. And that's pretty normal. I did the first time, probably the first 6 months actually, of every time I tried to write, I was like, wow, this is not going anywhere. I'm never going to be good at this. And that is something I think that is very normal, but is extremely untrue. That if you think that you can't do it, anybody can learn how to do this. It is literally just muscle memory. So if you can practice to the point where you feel comfortable with your strokes, which may take years, it has taken me years to get to this point, like actual years. I first started doing this when Callie was born and she just turned 4. Or no, when I was pregnant with her. So it's been more than 4 years. So I've spent very, very, very many hours practicing and drawing and stuff. And I wish I had kept every little thing from the very beginning, but I immediately threw it away so that nobody could see because it was so bad. But now I wish I had kept it to show people, like, look, I was so terrible at this. And if I can practice and get this looking to a point where like I kind of like the way that my lettering looks, then anybody can. Anybody can do this. This is one of my favorite quotes, and this is something that I had to remind myself often of when I was first learning calligraphy. Have no fear of perfection, you'll never reach it. Or in other words, don't worry about becoming perfect because you never will. The process is the enjoyable part, and learning and improving is the enjoyable part. So don't worry about it being good, and don't worry about it being bad. Like, if you like the way that calligraphy looks, then practice doing it. You will get better at it, and you can absolutely be just as good as any other calligrapher you've ever seen on the internet. It just takes a lot of practice. So please don't ever give up, especially after your first try, because it usually is your first try that makes you think that it's never going to work. So keep going. All right, so now I'm going to show you a little bit about stylization, which is the very funnest part. So I think I said earlier that if you practice the basics, like your strokes, just exactly how they should be traditionally, if you can master that first, it makes stylization so much easier. So if I could say anything, one, please, please, please don't give up. You can do this. Don't worry about being perfect because nobody is. And two, to master your basics first and then try your stylization, because your stylization will be a lot easier when you understand and have mastered the basics really well. So, I mean, like, and again, it's all how you enjoy calligraphy. If you want to start practicing stylization at any point, you definitely can. Who's to stop you? If that's what you enjoy, then definitely do it. But I think that I found it to be a lot easier when I had practiced my basics first. Okay, so with stylization, you can change anything that you want. So like once you know the rules, you can break them, right? Like that's kind of how everything goes, like rules of anything like writing or art or whatever. So you can change any part that you want. So I'm actually just going to write with a plain piece of paper. Okay, so I'll just use this as my baseline just so you can see. So you can change the size of your waistline and baseline. So generally like this size, I don't know, it's probably like a college rule width in between the waistline and baseline. If you want, you can change the proportions so that your baseline and waistline is really small and your ascending and descending is really big. So like if we wanted to write, I don't know, what's a letter? Unicorn or a word. So if I wanted to do, well, I guess that doesn't work because that's all small letters. How about Thursday? Okay, so if I wanted to do something like that, so like I've changed the proportions of my letters so that the ascending part is really big and the descending part is really big. And you can even go really crazy with your ascending loops. Like you can make them really big if you want to, and then make the small part even smaller. Or you can go the opposite way, where you make your waistline and baseline really small and your ascending and descending loops, your waist and baseline section really big and your ascending and descending really small. I all of a sudden couldn't remember the order that I said that. Anyway, opposite of this one. So if I wanted to write like that wasn't very good. Loop. Something like that. You can also change your slant to have no slant at all or a really big slant. Okay, and I'm writing really quick. Please don't write this fast when you're writing. I'm just, for example. And I actually can't believe that I did that really consistently. I don't usually write with a very big slant like that. You can increase or decrease the spacing so that you can squish it all together if you want, or I really like this, like to just spread it out really far. Okay, so everything is customizable. Like when you decide that you want to stylize and figure out what type you like best, then you get to play with anything. Like I said, the proportions, the spacing, the slant, not only the spacing between the letters, but also the spacing between like the actual size of your letters. So like your U could be a lot thinner or a lot fatter. Like literally you can do anything you want with all your stylizing. The last stylizing that I like to do is bouncing. And you can see that I've done this with this one. So the trick with that is you don't just put your letters wherever you want. The trick with it is you are always going to keep your baseline. See, if I draw a line through here, you can see that my letters generally sit on this baseline, and just every once in a while you drop something below or bounce above your baseline. So, and like my D is a little bit high right there, but you know, I would normally have that still sitting on the baseline if I had drawn a baseline before I started. So something like one of your underhands drop below, or one of your overhands, like this H, I could have drawn higher than normal and then gone out. So with your bouncing, always keep your baseline. It's not the letters that are going up and down. It's part of the letter, just one part of your stroke that you're going to go up and down. So generally everything is still going to stay within those guidelines. Just once in a while you're going to bounce up or down. And you don't want a ton, you know, like you don't want to bounce everything, because that just gets a little messy and you can't really tell that it's bouncing. It just looks bigger, I guess. I don't know. But so just, there's not even really a rule. Like once every couple of letters or whatever looks good. So like on Thursday, this one already has, you know, an ascending loops right here. So if I had, you know, like unicorn, you know, that word that I was thinking of that didn't have any up ascending loops or descending loops, then you can then you can go above more. So you kind of have to take into account what already is above and below already, and then just kind of insert some where you think it would look good. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. It's kind of hard to do it in the beginning, like figure it out. But I think if there's something every couple of letters, 2 or 3 letters, then that usually looks really nice instead of messy. Okay, so now some tips and advice that I have when you're practicing. Don't squeeze your pen, and I struggle with this big time. Like, I have like a white knuckle grip on my pen a lot. Your hand wears out faster when you're doing that, and your letters can get shakier, and it's harder to keep a really nice straight line. So if you're gripping your pen really hard, then you'll find that it's harder to stay consistent. So if you try to keep a looser grip, that definitely helps. If you're doing big lettering, like this is pretty small lettering in my opinion. If you're doing big lettering like on a poster, you're not going to use your wrist or your fingers. When you're lettering small, you kind of have to. But when you're doing bigger stuff, you're going to try to keep your wrist still and go from your shoulder. So most of your movements, you're just going to keep your fingers and your wrist and even your elbow, if you can, still, and do everything from your shoulder. And you will find that, I don't know why it is, like that big motion, those big loops are going to be a lot easier than if you're trying to do it with your fingers. If you can do it with your fingers, that's fantastic. You know, that's something that's really difficult to do. But if like your big loops like this, if you were doing a big ascending loop on a big piece of paper or something, then doing it from your shoulder is going to be a lot easier to get those smooth loops than it will be with using your fingers. Posture counts. You're going to want to sit up really straight with your shoulders loose, and don't be sitting in a chair that is too short, because if you have too much pressure on your elbow, that makes it so that you have to use more of your finger muscles, which are not as consistent. So if you have your elbow in a position that it can move easier, that helps you with flourishing, where you can move your arm instead of just your fingers. So make sure that you're sitting up, you're not hunched over or anything. That definitely improves your writing. I've said this before, lift your pen after every single stroke. Seriously, lift it every single time. Especially when you're practicing in the beginning, you will find that you have a lot more consistency. Like these, you can see like this line here, this line here, this line here. Even though they're not like my letter slant, they are really consistent. Yeah, this one's a little slanted out, but and like if you're not lifting your pen every single time, those start wandering around and going up and down, and the more inconsistent your writing is, the less pretty it looks. And that's something that I've had a difficult time mastering. Okay, I think I talked about this earlier, that sometimes when you have 2 strokes that are exactly the same right next to each other, like in book, it's easy to spot the inconsistencies if you can't write the same letter exactly the same both times. So what I do is I intentionally make them look different so that you can't tell that I can't write them the exact same. So if I was doing book, I do a small one and then a bigger one, like that. So like, you know, they're supposed to be different instead of just seeing that like, oh, well, those aren't very close to the same. And same with like double F, double L. If you intentionally make one a little bit different size, then it looks intentional instead of just inconsistent. So that's one little tip that I have, or tidbit I've developed over the time. This is the last thing. So I have found some calligraphy fonts that I really like, but have not really been able to copy, or couldn't find like somewhere written down an actual alphabet so I could like trace over them and kind of practice them. So the thing that I have discovered is that you just break down whatever font you like into strokes, and you'll be able to copy it a lot easier. So if you like, just for example, this Thursday, you really like it. but you don't see anywhere where it has like the whole alphabet written anywhere, and you want to be able to copy that or write something else than what they've written, like if they have a specific quote they've written but you want to use that font to write your own thing, then break it down into strokes. So like identify where their upper ascending loop is and what it looks like, identify what their descending loop looks like, or what their underhand and overhand turn looks like. You may not be able to find every stroke if it's just a small quote, but really you'll be able to find enough to identify like, okay, I see what their underhand stroke looks like, so I know what their compound stroke is going to look like, or I have an idea of what their overhand stroke is going to look like. And so then if you can identify the strokes, you'll be able to put together a lot of letters that you can't see in the quote if it doesn't have the entire alphabet. So that's something too that really makes it easy to copy a different font. So and like it's not always easy to perfect that font. It takes a lot of practice, but that's something that you can do. So I have spent years, because I'm too stubborn to take a class, I have spent years looking deep in the internet to find all of these tips and tricks of how to make calligraphy look really pretty, and everything that I've learned I've put in here and in this video for all you guys, so you get all the shortcuts from everything that has taken me years to learn. In case you're wondering, capital letters, they are a huge mess. There is nothing really teachable about them other than to practice. So I like, if they're, you know, the strokes, you know, the methods of thick and thin. I pretty much just do with capital letters is just find one that I like and practice it and practice it and practice it, because they're different enough that it's hard to teach those like you can teach strokes with all the lowercase letters. And flourishing is something else too that I am working on still, so I don't feel comfortable trying to teach since I'm not very good at it. So maybe that will be something in the future, is learning more flourishing. But so that's something that all I can say to do is just find something you like and practice it. So that is everything, my entire knowledge about calligraphy. So I hope that this was very enjoyable for you. Please, please, please don't give up. This takes a long time to establish, and it is so worth it. So please just keep practicing. Anybody can do this. Thanks.